I'm Alan Feldman, and I'm going to read a poem called The Terrible Memory, a poem about the phrase itself, where the phrase almost comes alive like a character in a children's book. The terrible memory. After a while, it becomes your friend, which is useful. Nothing again can be so terrible. Well, that's what it tells you, that you lived through the terror like a fairy tale. But the terrible memory is also a warning, how one planet can become another, with 3 black moons in front of an enormous blue sun. Ah, science fiction, says the terrible memory. As if it never happened. You were drawn in, but then the film ended, the credits rolled. But in the dark, when your thoughts are particularly awful and repetitive, the terrible memory is happening as if it is no memory at all, but some kind of persistent phenomenon. Go away, you tell it. This is not the time. And the terrible memory obeys. It moves backwards through the doorway as if you are the sovereign. But your sleep is troubled. What have I forgotten, you ask? And soon, like a parent summoned to a child's bed, it returns to comfort you. Terrible, terrible, it soothes, making a promise to protect you it can never keep. The inspiration behind this poem was probably a poem by Vasco Papa called The Little Box. And in his poem, he keeps repeating the little box, and he treats the little box like almost like a living thing, like the little box gets new teeth or something like that. And I gave it to my drop-in poetry workshop people, and I said, I want you to make a poem about a phrase. And if you want, the phrase itself can become, the subject of the poem, almost come alive if you want. And so while they were writing, I had about 6 different phrases picked out, and one of them was the terrible memory. And so I just wrote the poem, probably in about 20 minutes while they were writing. And I checked my notebook, and most of the poem was there during that first 20 minutes that I wrote. I have almost an allergy to poetic language. If it doesn't sound like an American voice speaking to me, I begin to suspect its authenticity. So the style is what I hear my own voice sounding like. I try not to say anything in a poem that I might not actually say in conversation. For the last 8 years since I retired, I've been giving weekly this free drop-in poetry workshop. And people come and I give them some kind of idea, usually rather strange, but that's good. It reorders their brains. And I ask them to write for 20 minutes on the spot. And many, many people find that there was a poem in them that they had no clue existed. But then other times they get an idea or they get a phrase, and it may pop up when they come back 2 years later and they've been working on it for a long, long time. But I think it doesn't mean that you haven't brooded on the subject of the poem, that there's been something in you that's been thinking about it and thinking about it. And I think that as I got older, I realized that the traumas that I had when I was young have become cauterized in a way. They're less painful. They're like films, where the credits roll at the end, and you don't really believe you could be plunged back into that, but from your long experience that it could happen. So I think it comes out of that insight.